The sky above Elora was burning. Ambassador Rivan stood at the shattered window of his command tower and watched his world die. Caliph warships, beautiful and silver, broke apart in orbit like glass ornaments dropped on stone. The Vren Dominion had come with 300 warships, and they had come hungry. Rivan was tall, even for a caliph. His translucent skin flickered with pale blue light, the way it always did when he was afraid. Right now, he was very afraid. Below him, the capital city groaned under bombardment. Buildings that had stood for 1,000 years collapsed into dust. Millions of his people were running underground, pushing into shelters that were never built for this many bodies. Children screamed. Parents carried what they could, and from the dark clouds above, Vren dropships fell like black rain. He turned from the window and faced the holographic display that filled the center of the room. 12 representatives from 12 spacefaring species. The Galactic Accord Council. Rivan had called them all. "Please," he said. His voice did not shake, but it wanted to. "The Vren Dominion has broken every treaty. They are slaughtering civilians. We need military support. Anything, anyone." Silence. One by one they answered. The Thessi said their fleet was too far. The Moldari said they could not risk war with the Vren. The Gorath expressed deep sympathy, but offered nothing. 12 species, 12 refusals. The Vren were too strong. Nobody wanted to be next. Rivan closed his eyes. He had known this would happen. The galaxy was full of civilizations that had learned the same lesson over millions of years. Do not fight what you cannot beat. Run, hide, survive. It was the smart thing to do. It was the logical thing, and it meant his people would die alone. A young Caliph officer named Doha stepped forward. She was barely old enough to wear her uniform, and her hands were shaking, but her voice was steady. "Ambassador," she said, "there is one more option. We could contact Earth." The room went quiet. Not the quiet of thoughtfulness, the quiet of fear. Rivan looked at her. "The humans." "Yes, sir." He had read the files on humanity. Every species in the Galactic Accord had files on humanity. They were a young species, barely 200 years in space. They had no ancient wisdom, no elegant technology, no psychic abilities, no natural armor or venom or size. By every measure the galaxy used to rank civilizations, humans were unremarkable. And yet every species in the galaxy was afraid of them. A holographic image flickered to life beside the council display. It was Elder Pasik, a Lathani historian. He was small and insectoid, with dozens of tiny legs and large wet eyes that blinked too often. He knew things. "Ambassador Rivan," Pasik said, and even through the hologram, his voice carried a warning. "I must advise you to think carefully. You do not understand what you would be calling." "I am calling for help," Rivan said. "No," Pasik said, "you are calling for something else." He pulled up a file. It was thick, much thicker than a file on a species only 2 centuries old should have been. "We cataloged them when they first made contact. We studied their history, their biology, their psychology." His many legs clicked nervously against each other. "Most intelligent species in the galaxy evolved to cooperate, to avoid conflict, to survive through peace. It is the natural path of intelligence. But humans," he paused, "humans did not take that path. They evolved on a world that was trying to kill them every single day. They fought everything. They fought their environment. They fought disease. They fought predators. And they won. Every single time, they won." Pasik's wet eyes blinked rapidly. "They are not soldiers, Ambassador. They are something much older. Something the galaxy stopped producing millions of years ago. They are apex predators with imagination. And they have not forgotten what they are." Rivan stared at the historian for a long time. Behind him, through the broken window, another Caliph ship exploded in orbit. The flash lit up the room like a second sun. "Send the signal," Ravan said to Doha. She hesitated. Sir, are you sure? My people are dying, Ravan said. Send it. Doha sent the signal. It was a simple distress call, transmitted on the emergency frequency that Earth monitored through deep space. It contained their coordinates, a summary of the invasion, and a single word repeated 3 times at the end, in the human language called English. Help, help, help. The signal crossed empty space at the speed of light, bounced through 2 relay stations, and reached Busan Station in 4 hours. Busan Station was humanity's military relay post on the edge of known space. It was not large, it was not impressive. It looked like a gray metal box bolted onto an asteroid. But it was always listening. A communications officer named Han Eunji was on duty when the signal arrived. She was 26 years old, had short black hair, and was drinking cold tea because she had forgotten about it an hour ago. She read the signal twice, then she set down her tea and forwarded it up the chain of command. 30 minutes later, the message reached the rapid response carrier, Dokkaebi. It was a mid-sized warship, fast and ugly, built for exactly this kind of situation. Its captain was a man named Kang Taeho. Taeho was in his quarters when the alert came. He was 44 years old. He had gray in his hair and scars on his hands, and a face that looked like it had been carved out of tired stone. He had been infantry before he was fleet. He had fought on the ground before he ever commanded from a bridge. He read the briefing on his datapad slowly, the way he read everything. Then he set down his coffee, stood up, and pressed the ship-wide intercom. All hands, he said. His voice was quiet, the way it always was. He never shouted. He never needed to. Wake up. We have a call. The Dokkaebi changed course. Its engines burned bright against the black of space. A single point of light, moving toward a war that 300 ships had started, and nobody else was willing to join. Somewhere on Elora, in a bunker deep underground, Ambassador Ravan sat down and put his head in his hands. He did not know if he had saved his people or doomed them. He only knew that something was coming, and the galaxy had very good reasons to be afraid of it. The Dokkaebi dropped out of faster-than-light travel like a stone thrown into still water. One moment, the space above Elora held nothing but Vren warships. The next moment, there was a single human carrier sitting in the middle of all of them, alone, as if it had always been there. Every sensor on every ship in the Vren blockade locked onto it at once. 300 warships turned their weapons toward one target. On the bridge of the Vren flagship, war leader Droken leaned forward in his command chair and let out a sound that was something between a laugh and a growl. Droken was enormous, nearly 3 meters tall. His scales were the color of dried blood, and his eyes were yellow and flat, like a desert lizard's. He had conquered 11 worlds. He had never lost a battle. He had never even come close. He looked at the single human ship on his display and felt nothing but amusement. "Open a channel," he said. His voice was deep enough to vibrate the floor. The channel opened. Drokan spoke slowly, the way one speaks to something small and stupid. "Human vessel, you are outnumbered 300 to 1. You will surrender your ship and your crew, or you will be destroyed. You have 60 seconds. Silence from the Dokkaebi. On the human ship's bridge, Yoon Hana stood beside Captain Taeho and studied her tactical display. She was 31 years old, sharp-faced, with dark eyes that never seemed to blink when she was thinking. She was always thinking. The numbers on her screen were very bad. 300 warships, heavy armor, superior firepower on every axis. She ran the calculations 3 times, then looked at Taeho and smiled. "The odds are finally interesting," she said. Taeho did not smile back, but something moved behind his tired eyes. He did not respond to Drokan's hail. Instead, he looked at Han Eunji, who sat at the communication station with her fingers already moving across her console. "Unji," he said, "show them what you found." Unji had not been idle during the 4-hour approach to Elora. She had intercepted Vren military communications, cracked their encryption, and pulled everything she could from their databases: personnel files, command structures, home addresses, family names. Every Vren commanding officer in the fleet laid bare. She broadcast it all, on every Vren military frequency, simultaneously, the personal information of every captain, every officer, every war leader's advisor, appeared on their own screens, their families, their homes, everything they thought was hidden. The effect was immediate. Across the Vren fleet, officers froze, communications channels erupted with confused, angry, frightened voices. Drokan's yellow eyes went wide for just a moment before he controlled himself. But that moment was enough. The humans had not fired a single shot, and they had already drawn blood. "Launch the drones," Tejo said. 200 autonomous combat drones poured from the Dakabi's belly like a swarm of metal insects. They spread across the Vren formation, fast and small, and impossible to track all at once. They were not meant to destroy the fleet. They were meant to create chaos, and chaos was what humans did best. But the drones were just the distraction. "Drop pods," Tejo said. "Go." 40 drop pods fired from the Dakabi's underside. Each one carried a squad of human marines in powered exoskeleton armor. They did not aim for the Vren fleet. They aimed for the planet below. They punched through the gaps in the blockade, while the Vren were still trying to figure out what the drones were doing, and they fell toward Elora like burning stars. Choi Sun-woo was in the first pod. He was the biggest man in the company, wide as a doorframe and strong enough to bend steel pipe with his bare hands. Off-duty, he was quiet and gentle, and liked to cook soup for the crew. On duty, he was something else entirely. His pod screamed through the atmosphere. At 12,000 meters, a Vren interceptor clipped the side of his pod with a plasma round. The hull cracked. Air rushed out. Warning lights turned the inside red. Any sane person would have panicked. Sun-woo did not panic. He grabbed a loose piece of interior plating, wedged it against the breach, and held it there with one arm, while he manually rerouted the pod's power systems with the other. Sun-woo held on. He landed in the middle of a Vren forward operating base. The pod hit the ground hard enough to crack stone and send a cloud of dust 50 meters into the air. The Vren soldiers at the base turned toward the impact point, weapons raised, expecting wreckage. The pod door blew open. Sun-woo stepped out. His armor was scorched black. Smoke poured off his shoulders. He was on fire in 3 places, and he did not seem to notice. He looked at the Vren soldiers looking at him, and he started moving. He did not stop moving for 6 hours. Above the planet, Hana took command of the orbital battle. The Dakabi was one ship against hundreds, and any conventional captain would have kept distance and tried to pick off targets from range. Hana was not conventional. She flew the Dakabi directly into the thickest cluster of Vren warships, so close that their weapons could not fire without hitting each other. It was insane. It worked. Park Jin-ho, the chief engineer, had prepared for exactly this. He had rigged the Dakabi's outer hull with reactive EMP charges. Every time a Vren ship got close enough to attempt a ram or a boarding action, the charges detonated on contact, sending electromagnetic pulses through the enemy vessel and shutting down their systems. Vren ships drifted dead in space, their lights going dark one by one, while the Dakabi weaved between them like a fish through rocks. Drokan watched from his flagship and felt something he had never felt before. He could not name it. It sat in his stomach like cold metal. It was not fear. He told himself it was not fear, but his hands had tightened on his command chair until his claws left marks in the metal. "They are one ship," he said to his tactical advisor. "One ship." There was nothing to say. On the surface of Elora, in an underground bunker, Ambassador Rivan watched the feeds from the few remaining surface cameras. The sky was full of fire. Burning streaks crossed the darkness above, dozens of them, falling fast. Human drop pods, each one a metal coffin carrying something the galaxy had not seen in a very long time. A Caliph child, no older than 5, tugged on Rivon's sleeve. The child's translucent skin was pale with fear, and her wide eyes reflected the fires above. "Are the stars falling?" she asked. Rivon looked down at her. He looked at the sky. He thought about what Elder Posik had told him. Apex predators with imagination. "No," he said quietly. "Something worse is coming down." By the second morning, 400 human marines held the southern coast of Elora against 50,000 Vren ground troops. By every rule of war that the galaxy had written over millions of years, this was not a battle. It was a number that did not make sense. 400 against 50,000 was not a fight. It was a math problem with only one answer. The humans had not read the galaxy's rules of war. Seo Murray set up her field hospital in a collapsed Caliph school near the waterfront. The building had lost its roof and most of one wall, but the foundation was solid and the basement was dry. She turned the largest room into a surgical bay, using equipment she had carried in her drop pod and supplies she pulled from the rubble around her. She was 29 years old, small, with steady hands and a voice so calm it could slow a racing heart just by speaking. The first patients were Caliph civilians. They came in, carrying their wounded, their translucent skin flickering with the dull gray of pain and exhaustion. They were terrified, not just of the Vren, but of the humans. They had heard the stories. The entire galaxy had heard the stories. Mireille did not give them a speech about how humans were friendly. She did not try to explain anything. A Caliph woman brought in a child with burns covering half her body, and Mireille dropped to her knees, opened her medical kit, and went to work. Human medical nanites were designed for human biology, but Mireille had studied xenobiology for 6 years, and she adapted the nanite programming on the spot, rewriting code on a cracked datapad while holding the child's hand. The nanites took. The burns began to heal. The child stopped crying. The Caliph woman stared at Mireille with wide, wet eyes. She said something in her own language that Mireille did not understand. But she understood the look. It was the same in every species. "Thank you." Mireille worked for 14 hours without stopping. She treated 47 patients, Caliph and human alike. She did not eat. She did not sit down. When Park Jin-ho brought her water, she drank it without looking up from the Caliph elder whose broken arm she was setting. On the other side of the ruined city, Captain Kang Taeho landed his shuttle in a field of broken glass and walked into what remained of the Caliph Defense Force. There were about 2,000 of them, soldiers in name, but most were volunteers with outdated weapons and no real training. They had been fighting for 3 days before the humans arrived, and they had been losing for all 3. Their eyes were hollow, their hands shook. They looked at Taeho the way people look at something they are not sure is real. Taeho did not give them a speech. He was not good at speeches, and he knew it. He ate their food, which was a kind of bland paste that tasted like wet paper, and he did not complain about it. He asked one of them to teach him how to say 3 things in Caliph: hello, thank you, and follow me. Then he showed them how to rig Vren supply caches to explode using nothing but wire and a power cell. By dawn, 1,500 Caliph soldiers were following him into the field, and they were no longer shaking. The Vren fought the way the Vren always fought, in massive formations, heavy armor in front, infantry behind, overwhelming force applied to a single point until it broke. It had worked on 11 worlds. On Elora, it stopped working. The humans did not fight in formations. They fought in small groups. They appeared from nowhere, hit hard, and disappeared. They set traps. They used the terrain. They turned every ruined building into a fortress, and every flooded street into a kill zone. The Vren would advance a kilometer and then lose it to a counterattack that came from 3 directions at once. They could not pin the humans down, because the humans would not stay in one place. The worst of it was the Battle of the Tidal Flats. Choi Sun-woo and 30 Marines were ordered to hold a bridge on the eastern coast. The bridge connected the mainland to a peninsula where 40,000 Kalith civilians were sheltering. If the Vren crossed that bridge, those people would die. 3,000 Vren soldiers advanced on the bridge at dawn. Sun-woo looked at the numbers and the terrain and the tide charts and started giving orders. He mined the approach road with explosives buried in mud. He positioned shooters on the rooftops of half-submerged buildings on either side of the bridge. He rigged the shallow water with underwater demolition charges that would turn the tidal flats into a killing field when the water rose. The first wave hit the mines and lost 200 soldiers in 90 seconds. The second wave pushed through the smoke and met crossfire from both sides. The third wave tried to flank through the shallow water and hit the underwater charges when the tide came in. The water turned red. The Vren kept coming. Sun-woo's Marines kept killing them. 11 hours. For 11 hours, 30 humans held that bridge. They ran out of ammunition twice and used captured Vren weapons. They ran out of medical supplies and bandaged wounds with torn uniforms. Sun-woo himself took a plasma round to his left arm and kept fighting with his right. When one of his Marines, a young man named Yoon Dae-sung, took a hit to both legs, Sun-woo picked him up, put him on his back, and carried him 2 kilometers through enemy fire to the evacuation point, without slowing down. When it was over, 30 humans had held against 3,000. The bridge still stood. The civilians on the peninsula were alive. Elder Posick watched all of this from a remote observation post on a Lethani science vessel in deep orbit. He had not slept in 2 days. His many legs tapped against the floor in a constant anxious rhythm as he wrote and rewrote his report on humanity. He watched the footage from the tidal flats 3 times. He watched Mireille treating alien children with alien medicine she had invented on the spot. He watched Taeho eating terrible food with soldiers who did not speak his language and turning them into fighters overnight. He added a new entry to his report. His small hands trembled as he typed. "They treat war the way other species treat art," he wrote, "with creativity, with passion, and with an unsettling degree of personal investment. They do not fight because they must. They fight because something inside them will not allow them to do anything else. This is not a species that learned violence. This is a species that was born from it, and somehow against all logic, learned love as well. That combination is the most dangerous thing I have ever documented." On the Vren flagship, war leader Drokan received the casualty reports from the surface. He read them twice because he did not believe them the first time. He stood up from his command chair and walked to the observation window and stared down at the planet below. "They are only 400, he said. His tactical advisor, who had been very quiet for several hours, cleared his throat. "War leader," he said carefully, "they were 400 this morning." Drokan turned to look at him. The advisor's scales had gone pale, which meant he was frightened. "They are still 400, the advisor said. "But the Kalith are fighting now too. The humans are teaching them. And our soldiers—" He hesitated. "Our soldiers are beginning to hesitate." Then he gave an order he had never given in his entire career. "Send the reserves. All of them." On the 3rd day, the battle changed. It did not change because the humans got stronger, or because the Vren got weaker. It changed because Han Unji, sitting alone in a dark room on the Dokkaebi, with 5 screens in front of her and cold tea beside her, finally cracked the Vren's Central Command encryption. She had been working on it since they arrived. 46 hours of staring at alien code, pulling patterns from noise, building keys from broken pieces. She had slept for 2 hours total, eaten nothing but protein bars, and talked to no one except to ask for more tea. When the encryption finally broke open, she did not celebrate. She just leaned back in her chair, stretched her fingers, and got to work. Within an hour, she was inside the Vren fleet's nervous system. She could see every order Drokhan sent, every response his captains returned. And more importantly, she could send orders of her own. She started small. A course correction here. A targeting priority there. Subtle things that looked like normal communication errors. Then she got bolder. She sent a fabricated retreat order to 3 destroyers on the edge of the blockade, stamped with Drokhan's personal command code. The destroyers broke formation and jumped to faster-than-light travel before anyone could stop them. She sent conflicting targeting data to 2 cruisers that were flying close together. They opened fire on each other before they realized what had happened. The Vren fleet began to eat itself. On the surface, Park Jin-ho had not slept at all, but he did not seem to care. He had found a ruined Kalith factory on the outskirts of the capital, and for 2 days he had been living inside it like a creature in a cave, surrounded by wires and metal and sparking tools. He was building something. Jin-ho was the kind of engineer who looked at rules and saw suggestions. He had taken power cells from destroyed Vren vehicles, crystal resonators from Kalith communication towers, and focusing arrays from the Dokubi's spare parts inventory. He was combining technology from 3 different species that every galactic engineering manual said could not be combined. The physics were wrong. The power signatures were incompatible. The safety margins did not exist. Jin-ho did not care about safety margins. On the 3rd morning, he fired his creation. It was ugly. It looked like a pile of scrap metal bolted to a broken building. It made a sound when it powered up that hurt people's teeth, but when it fired, a beam of white-hot energy punched through the atmosphere and hit a Vren cruiser in orbit, directly through its main reactor. The cruiser broke in half and drifted apart in 2 burning pieces. 5 Kalith engineers had been watching Jin-ho work. When the beam fired and the cruiser died, they stood in silence for a long moment. Then one of them began to cry. Not from sadness, from something they did not have a word for. The realization that someone could look at impossible and simply refuse to accept it. Jin-ho patted the machine like it was a dog. 1 shot only, he said. Burned out the resonators. He looked at the Kalith engineers and grinned. Help me build another one. While Jin-ho built weapons and Unji tore the Vren fleet apart from the inside, Seo Mirai fought a different kind of battle. Human squads had been capturing Vren soldiers during ground operations, and the prisoners were terrified. In Vren culture, captured enemies were killed. There was no other option. That was simply how war worked. Mirai treated them instead. She set broken bones. She cleaned wounds. She gave them water and food. A Vren officer named something unpronounceable had taken shrapnel to his chest and was dying slowly when the humans brought him in. Mirai spent 3 hours operating on him with tools designed for human bodies, adapting her technique in real time, and saved his life. The officer woke up and found a human woman sitting beside him, checking his vital signs. He did not understand. He asked her, through a translator, why she had not killed him. Mirai looked at him for a moment and said, "Because you were hurt." The officer stared at her for a long time. Then he told her where Drokhan's ground command center was. Not because she asked, not because she threatened, because something in his understanding of the universe had shifted, and he did not know what to do with a species that would save the life of an enemy. Captain Taeho used that intelligence to plan the final assault. He gathered his remaining forces, 200 human marines, 1,500 Caliph volunteers. They would hit Drokon's surface headquarters at night, moving through the flooded ruins of the old city where Vren heavy vehicles could not follow. It would be close combat, building to building, room to room, the kind of fighting that humans were built for. Tejo looked at the Caliph fighters before they moved out. 3 days ago, these people had been shaking with fear. Now they stood straight. They checked their weapons. They looked at each other with something that was not quite courage, but was close to it. Tejo had not given them bravery. He had shown them that bravery was possible, and they had found their own. They moved through the ruins like water, silent, fast. The Vren sentries did not see them until it was too late. The assault hit the compound from 4 directions at once, and within minutes, the outer defenses were broken. But the inner compound was a different matter. Vren elite guards fought for every corridor. The halls were narrow, and the lighting was red, and the air smelled like smoke and blood. Humans and Caliph fell. Tejo kept moving forward, because stopping meant dying, and dying meant failing the people behind him. He reached the command center. The door was thick metal, sealed shut. Sunwoo hit it with a breaching charge, and it blew inward. Tejo went through first, because he always went first. War leader Drokan was waiting for him. Drokan stood in the center of the room in full-powered battle armor. He was nearly 3 meters tall. His yellow eyes burned with fury and something else, something that might have been respect. He looked at Tejo, who was a full meter shorter, and 100 kilograms lighter, and covered in dust and blood, and he said nothing. There was nothing left to say. They fought. It was not a fair fight. Drokan was bigger, stronger, faster, and wearing armor that could stop a rifle round. He hit Tejo with a backhand that sent the human captain into a wall, hard enough to crack the stone. Tejo got up. Drokan hit him again, a kick to the chest that broke 2 ribs. Tejo got up again. Drokan paused. He did not understand. He had fought dozens of species, and they all had a breaking point. A moment where the body and the mind agreed that the fight was over. He could see that Tejo was in pain. He could see that Tejo knew he was outmatched. But the human kept getting up, and there was nothing in his eyes that looked like surrender. 800 meters away, on the roof of a collapsed building, Yoon Hana lay flat on her stomach behind a rifle she had assembled during atmospheric re-entry. She had left the Dokkaebi in Unji's hands and dropped to the surface 3 hours ago because she had looked at the tactical map and known exactly how this fight would end if she was not there. She squeezed the trigger. The round hit Drokan in the knee joint, the one gap in his armor where the plates met. His leg buckled. He dropped to one knee with a sound like a tree falling. Tejo moved before Drokan could recover. He did not hesitate. He did not think. He ended the fight the way humans ended things, completely. Drokan lay on the floor, bleeding from his knee and his jaw and his pride. He looked up at Tejo, who stood over him, breathing hard, cracked ribs moving under torn armor, blood running down his face. "What are you?" Drokan asked. Tejo reached down and pulled him to his feet. Because humans took prisoners. Because humans did not kill the defeated. Because that was the part that no species in the galaxy could understand. "We're the backup," Tejo said. With Drokan captured and his command broken, the Vren Dominion fleet had no head. Orders stopped coming. Captains argued with each other over open channels. Some wanted to fight. Some wanted to run. Some did not know what they wanted, because they had never had to think for themselves before. Unji helped them decide. She broadcast Drokan's capture on every Vren frequency. She included video. The greatest war leader in Vren history, on his knees, pulled to his feet by a creature half his size. The image burned through the fleet like fire through dry grass. Within 12 hours, the first Vren ships broke orbit and ran. Within 48 hours, the blockade was gone. 300 warships that had come to swallow a world, scattered like frightened animals into the dark between the stars. The Dockaby held orbit until the last one left. The ship was in terrible shape. Half its systems were running on backup power. The hull was scarred and dented and blackened in places where Vren weapons had come too close. Park Jin-ho had been welding patches onto the outer hull for 6 hours straight, and he said the ship was holding together out of stubbornness more than engineering. Nobody argued with that. On the surface of Elora, the silence after the battle was louder than the fighting had been. Smoke rose from the ruined cities. The ocean, which had turned gray with ash and debris, slowly began to clear. Caliph rescue teams moved through the wreckage, pulling survivors from collapsed shelters. Human marines worked beside them, lifting rubble with powered armor that had been built for war and was now being used to save lives. Ambassador Ravan stood in what remained of the Caliph capital and watched the sunrise over broken towers. He had not slept in 4 days. His translucent skin was dull with exhaustion, flickering only faintly with the pale blue light that meant he was feeling something too big for words. Beside him stood Captain Tejo, who looked like he had been through a machine that existed only to make people tired. His ribs were racked. His face was bruised. He stood straight anyway. Ravan had prepared a formal statement of gratitude. He had written it carefully, in the proper diplomatic language, with the correct phrases and the appropriate level of official respect. He looked at Tejo, at the dried blood on his armor, and the quiet patience in his eyes, and he threw the statement away. "Thank you," he said. Just that. In English, because Tejo had learned 3 words of Caliph, and Ravan wanted to meet him halfway. Tejo nodded. "You called. We came." The Caliph held a ceremony that evening. It was ancient, older than their space travel, older than their written history. They called it the naming of kin, and it had never been performed for anyone outside the Caliph species. They did it in the ruins of their greatest hall, under a sky that still smelled like smoke, with the light of their 2 moons turning everything silver. They declared the humans kin of Elora, brothers and sisters of the ocean world, bound by blood that had been shed together on the same ground. Ravan spoke the words. The Caliph who had survived sang a low, haunting song that seemed to come from the water itself. Seo Mireille stood in the front row and cried, without making a sound. Choi Sunwoo stood beside her with his massive arms folded, and his jaw tight, and his eyes wet. And he would deny it later, and nobody would believe him. Park Jin-ho was in the back row, sketching ideas for rebuilding the Caliph water purification system on a napkin he had found somewhere. Han Eunji recorded the song. She did not know why. She just felt like someone should remember it. Far away, in a chamber that floated in the empty space between 3 star systems, the Galactic Accord Council convened an emergency session. 12 species sat around a curved table made of light, and none of them could look at each other. They had all refused to help Elora. They had all watched while the humans went alone. And now, they had all seen what happened. The recordings had spread across the galaxy in hours. Every species with access to a communication network had seen the footage. Sunwoo holding a bridge against 3,000 with 30 marines. Hana flying a single ship through a fleet of hundreds. Jinho building an orbital cannon out of garbage. Mireille saving the lives of enemy soldiers who had come to kill her. Tejo beaten to the ground twice, getting up twice, and winning. Species that had considered themselves the most dangerous beings in their region of space, watched the footage and went very quiet. Military analysts on a dozen worlds revised their threat assessments. Diplomats who had treated humanity as a curiosity suddenly found themselves wanting to make phone calls. Elder Posick presented his final report. He stood before the council on his many small legs, and his voice shook, the way it always did when he was saying something he wished were not true. "We spent millions of years searching the galaxy," he said. "We were convinced that intelligence naturally moves toward peaceful cooperation, that violence is a phase, that evolution selects for harmony." He paused. His large, wet eyes blinked. "Humans prove that intelligence can select for something else entirely. They are relentless. They adapt to anything. They create solutions that should not work, and make them work through sheer refusal to accept failure. And they do all of this not for territory, not for resources, not for power. They do it for strangers. 12 species, ancient and wise and afraid. They are not the warriors we feared," he said. "They are something worse. They are warriors who care. And I do not know what the galaxy does with that information. But I suggest we start by never giving them a reason to come for us, the way they came for the Vren." The council sat in silence for a long time after that. In the weeks that followed, 7 species quietly requested diplomatic and military alliances with Earth. Humanity, which had been a minor curiosity on the edge of known space, became the most sought-after ally and the most feared enemy in the galaxy overnight. Not because they were the strongest, not because they had the best technology, but because they were the ones who showed up. The Dockaby limped home toward Busan Station. The journey took 6 days at reduced speed, because 3 of the 4 main engines were held together with welding wire and hope. Most of them slept for the first 2 days straight, and then spent the remaining 4 pretending they were fine. Hana spent the trip reviewing after-action reports and writing recommendations for metals she knew Taeho would refuse. Jinho fell asleep on a pile of engine parts, and nobody moved him because he looked comfortable. Mireille sat in her quarters and wrote letters to the families of the 11 Marines who had not come home. She wrote each one by hand, because she believed that was important. Eunji sat in the communications room and listened to the Caliph song she had recorded, playing it on a loop so softly that only she could hear it. Taeho stood on the observation deck alone. He did this every night. He watched the stars pass and thought about the things a captain thinks about when the fighting is done, and the dead are counted, and the living still need him to be steady. Hana found him there, on the last night before they reached Busan Station. She stood beside him and said nothing for a while, because she knew him well enough to know that silence was sometimes what he needed. Then she asked the question that had been sitting in her chest for 6 days. "Do you think they will leave us alone now?" Taeho looked at the stars. He thought about Ravan's face when the signal was sent. He thought about the Caliph child who asked if the stars were falling. He thought about Droken on the floor asking, "What are you?" and the honest answer that Taeho had given, because lies took more energy than he had left. "No," he said, "but next time they will not wait so long to call." Hana nodded. She did not say anything else. She did not need to. The Dokkaebi sailed on through the dark, one small and battered ship carrying tired people home. Behind them, across the galaxy, in 1,000 languages, on 1,000 worlds, the story was already spreading. They had called for backup. And the monsters the galaxy feared had finally appeared. But the monsters brought medics. The monsters built shelters. The monsters carried the wounded and buried the dead and taught the broken how to fight again. And the galaxy, for the first time in its long and ancient history, understood that the most terrifying thing in the universe was not a species that could destroy worlds. It was a species that would cross the stars to save one.